I had a lot of baggage from friends, family, and different press going in to see Joker. My mom was terrified of this film. Allegedly, it endorsed resorting to violence and made us sympathize with a deranged murderer. It reignited the decades-old debate of certain entertainment media being dangerous and instigating criminal acts. Let me make something perfectly clear that I shouldn't even have to do in the first place. If the only thing keeping you from performing an act of murder is a video game or piece of film, you're a terrible person and you were in a bad spot to begin with. That being said, it's still possible for a movie to carry a toxic message, such as Birth of a Nation, which paints a hate group in a positive light. But Joker is not one of those films, rather, it's a slow burn that shows us in excruciating detail a series of events and revelations that transform the main character into something from an aimless person going through the motions to someone with horrific ideals that finds purpose in the worst way possible. A monster not created necessarily, but ignited by the culture that surrounds him. It's also a story that is so detached from the DC expanded universe and comic book movies in general that it might as well not be one. And if they did decide to ultimately attach it to a larger piece of expanded DC universe films, I fear for the validity that it would keep as its own standalone story.
You don't listen, do you?
Arthur Fleck is a dysfunctional man caught in the wretched underbelly of Gotham. He lives with his elderly mother and has some loose life goal of becoming a comedian. He works as a party clown by day, trying to make ends meet, but is constantly berated by his fellow employees and the denizens of the city. Days blur together, and this bizarre makeup-totting occupation is the closest thing to stability that Arthur's able to find, but there's still a lot of pain. In fact, one of the first shots in the movie that really let me know what I was getting into was the tear trailing down his face in the first scene that smeared his makeup. After being beaten down by a handful of violent children at work, one of his coworkers gives him a firearm to protect himself. Arthur is initially shocked, but the prospect of this gun, this agency and security that it gives, excites him. Up to this point in his life, so much is out of his control. He laughs unconditionally as part of a medical condition. He's a slave to constant negative thoughts polluting his mind, made worse by the fact that his therapist doesn't even care. And his fragile sanity prevents him from taking the first steps towards his dream of being a comedian. This gun has a finality and simple purpose to it that is just fascinating to him, prompting him to play with it in his apartment and obsess over it. Suddenly, he has options. Arthur later attends a comedy club, sticking out in the audience like a sore thumb, laughing at all the wrong times, not only because of his affliction, but because he doesn't understand basic human behavior. It's like the dead opposite of Forrest Gump, where his disconnection with basic formalities and interactions between people is cute and endearing. Arthur's disconnection is rigid, jagged, and terribly hard to watch. During a dance performance for some sick children, Arthur's gun accidentally falls out of his pants. He scrambles to pick it back up, even playing it off as a joke and holding a finger to his lips. But the damage is done. He's fired, losing the only outlet he's had for his stress up to this point. Sure, his job wasn't perfect, but it was an escape. It was the only time he didn't have to pretend. While on the subway, he encounters three men flirting with a woman who clearly has no interest in them. His laugh-inducing affliction prompts her to finally leave, and the three men approach him. After knocking him down to the floor and kicking him repeatedly, Arthur gets fed up and finally spirals down his point of no return. He draws his gun, killing two of the men and crippling the third as he tries to escape. Even the way he kills people is awkward. He scurries to his feet and chases the man off the subway, pivoting his head in and out of the vehicle as he tries to see if the man's running off. He darts from the cart, eventually getting gunned down in cold blood before dying on some stairs. This is where Joker really takes off. If too much of the movie up to this point was character development instead of substantial events, things are actually happening now. I'm sure you've figured it out at this point, but this is not Justice League Joker or even Heath Ledger's Joker. Arthur doesn't have an alibi. He doesn't have an escape route, a backup plan, or even a normal plan. Throughout the movie, he barely stumbles past the police at every turn. The adrenaline courses through him. Having just taken 3 lives, he retreats to a public bathroom, and while most movies are content with showing us only the essentials and just enough scenes to develop a character, Joker is insistent on painfully keeping us as up close and personal with Arthur at all times as possible. There's a whole minute or so of him dancing in the bathroom as some weird coping mechanism. In the oddest way I can think of, it reminded me of the new God of War, in that the camera is so close and in your face as possible. With the character throughout the entire story, it forces you to look at everything through better and worse.
Close your heart to it.
So Arthur retires to his apartment, eventually seeing news of his murders unfold on television, and the reception to it is surprisingly positive. The men he killed were actually corrupt Wall Street journalists, and he inadvertently started a movement, an act of defiance against the rich and powerful who refused to pay attention to the suffering of the citizens. Of course, this wasn't what he intended. The way people interpreted it is humorous to him. He accidentally got his point across. It resonated so well with everyone. He finds out the awful and uncaring nature of Gotham wasn't a problem unique to him, and for one of the first times in his life, people were paying attention. He visits his therapist again and finds out that the funding is being cut off. He will effectively have no way to continue his medications and talk to anyone about his problems. He stands up to her for the first time, saying she never even listens. All she does is go through the motions, just like he used to. With his recent crime, Arthur has broken his mold. Finally stepping up to the task, he visits a comedy club again and does his first stand-up routine, but his condition is so bad that he's laughing for the entire first 2 minutes that he's on stage, and when he finally does start, his jokes are so bad that they draw the attention of his idol, Murray Franklin, a late-night talk show host that lambasts his awful jokes and odd quirks on his TV program. More on that later. With the comedy act behind him, Arthur intercepts a letter from his mother that seems to confirm he's the illegitimate son of billionaire Thomas Wayne. This floors him. He angrily confronts his mother about hiding it. This urges him to visit Wayne Estate, where at the gates he encounters a young Bruce Wayne. The amount of foreshadowing on display here is great. Things quickly get awkward, and one of the caretakers demands that he leaves, saying he's not really related to the Waynes at all. He calls his mom delusional and sick. Arthur stands up for his mother, grabbing the man through the gates by the neck before letting go and running off as fast as he can. After arriving at his apartment, he finds that his mother is being taken away by the ambulance. He stays at the hospital, and on top of that, the police are closing in, asking him questions outside the building about the clown that killed those 3 men on the subway. He writes them off and visits the room where they're keeping his mother. It's here that he sees Murray Franklin poking fun at his comedy act. This messes with him hardcore. There are now 2 different versions of himself that are in the public eye, and the one that he was most of his life is getting ridiculed.
No one laughed at me. Well, no one's laughing now.
You can say that again, pal.
After sulking in his apartment, Arthur learns that Thomas Wayne will be at Wayne Hall for a charity event. This is his chance to confront him and find out the truth. In the bathroom, Thomas explains that Arthur's mother was a sick and delusional woman who had adopted him in the time that he knew her. He tells him that she had been admitted to the Arkham Mental Hospital. Tensions grow, and eventually Thomas slugs him in the face. Just when everything seems at its worst, Arthur gets a call from the Murray Franklin show saying they want him on as a guest. It's unclear at first why he says yes after the humiliation he subjected him to, but it becomes clear that he's going to try and use his appearance on there as some platform to demonstrate his pain to a wide audience. The accusations against his mother instill doubt in Arthur. He visits the mental hospital and manages to nab some private files concerning her from the man behind the counter. After reading through it, he uncovers everything. His mother was an abusive and drug-addicted sociopath that allowed men to beat her son. He was subjected to many awful things, including being tied to a radiator. This is made worse by the fact that Arthur now realizes the reason for his disjointed and rigid personality and deep psychological mishaps isn't because he was born that way, but because his mother was an awful person. Visiting her in the hospital for the last time, he explains to her while she's unconscious that his laugh was never a condition and that that's just who he is, which really says it all. Arthur has accepted his trauma and all of the little quirks that come with it because he knows that this is who he was shaped into, not who he was born as. He can never change the past or remove that part of his life, but at the very least he can remove the person who caused it. He holds a pillow to his mother's face and kills her, which is just really sad. Earlier scenes show him dancing with his mother in his apartment, taking care of her and bonding with her over the Murray Show. With Murray ridiculing him on public television and his mother having been awful all along, Arthur's lost the few good things that he had. You figure he'd feel awful at this point, but far from it. Disassociating with Murray, killing his mother, and finding out the truth, all of these things invigorate Arthur. These things he's lost recently aren't tragic, but things he's just had to laugh off to move on. He even goes as far as to put his makeup on for no work-related reason. After the iconic stair dancing scene, two detectives confront Arthur out in the open. Arthur gives chase, running away and prying through a crowd of masked protesters. The people swarm the detectives on the subway, beating them both into critical condition. His own social movement has saved him from these two. With nothing left but his spot on the Murray Show, Arthur carries on. In the statement that finally cements his transformation,
Murray, one small thing.
yeah,
When you bring me out, can you introduce me as Joker?
things on the show start off innocently enough, but things very quickly get out of hand. Joker goes from being weird to saying an off-color joke to flat out admitting on camera that he killed the men on the subway. By the very end, Joker pours his heart out on camera. He lays everything on the table. His anxiety, his isolation, his negligence. He calls out the hypocrisy of the crowd for caring about people that Thomas Wayne liked over people actually suffering in poverty. It's not enough. He's still shunned, not only because of the messed up things he's done, but because of just how off-kilter and weird he is. The audience hasn't followed Arthur up to this point. They can't understand, and as messed up as he is, he understands that. He's ridiculed and booed on stage for all of the awful things he's done, but he just laughs at the crowd, because what he's saying on that stage isn't for them. He's not here to convince anyone sitting in that studio. It's a cathartic message for himself and the people setting fire to the streets in masks, because for the first time in his life, he's left a mark on something. This new religion he's offhandedly developed plays to his strength. He lashes out the only way he knows how at this point, by causing pain. He draws his gun and kills Murray on live television, echoing his message over dozens of news reports in all of Gotham. I especially like how Joaquin Phoenix closes his eyes and flinches during this scene, though it might be hard to tell with Legos. As much as things have changed, there's still a lot of weight that he feels over taking someone's life, never mind it being someone who used to be his idol. Joker is promptly arrested. Seeing the destruction from the back of the police car, he laughs to himself. An ambulance crashes into the vehicle, killing the officer. Two protesters pull Arthur out of the back of the car. He stands on top of it and dances in front of all of his supporters. He's finally found some sort of niche, even if it's the most unorthodox and violent thing. This was the natural conclusion of everything that had happened to him, even if he didn't ask for it. Of course, it's a nice moment, but he does get arrested. Again, as the ending implies, since he's in a loony hospital towards the end of the movie. And that's Joker. Interestingly enough, my problems with the film overlap with the problems I had for El Camino, a Breaking Bad movie. So much scenes are dedicated to showing us how broken and traumatized the main character is, that it starts to stunt the pace of the movie. Not that those moments weren't great or anything, they were, but there was a lot. I desperately wanted us to move on to the next act or story beat, but the director didn't think that we got the message at that point, even though we certainly did. I'm not claiming that I need a Michael Bay-style heart-thumping, explosion-ridden adventure to be satisfied. I love shows like Better Call Saul that have a slower pace to them, but I never want scenes to blur together in my mind after I watch a film, and as great as it is, that certainly happened with Joker for me. Another issue I had was the lack of subtlety, which is really rampant in one of the final scenes of the film. In fact, Arthur pretty much just tells us everything during the talk show, which doesn't really make for great storytelling, since it's more fun to probe at those details in your mind to try and come to your own conclusions instead of just being told what it is. But all that aside, what's the point of all of this? What is this movie trying to explain to us, and what are we supposed to take away from it? Joker is not delivering a completely new message, nor is it as thought-provoking as it wants us to think it is. But it's a wonderfully told and deeply personal tale that will be in the public conscience for a long time. Like lots of other great stories, it has a flexibility to it. It's easy for us to put ourselves in Arthur's shoes, even if we're not nearly as detached and delusional. This movie asks some tough questions, and it doesn't pretend to have all of the answers. Like, sure, it's easy to pin all the awful stuff that's happened on Arthur, but a large part of what got him to this point is the terrible decisions of other people. The biggest takeaway from Joker is that we can contribute to the worst part of a person without even knowing it, and that those parts can fester and grow to a point that becomes harder and harder to ignore.
Bozo?
No.
B-O-Z-O.
Sorry.
You've never heard of Bozo the Clown?
No!
How could you not know who Bozo the Clown is?
I don't know, I just don't.
How can you call yourself a clown and not know who Bozo is?
Hey, man, what are you hassling me for? This is just a gig, it's not my life. I don't know who Bozo is. What, is he a clown?
What, is he a clown? What, are you kidding me?
Well, what is he?
Yes, he's a clown!
All right, so what's the big deal? There's millions of clowns.
All right, just forget it.
Forget me? For you should forget it. You're living in the past, man. You hung up on some clown from the 60s, man.